exploring fear, faith, and stories that scare the hell out of us. Be afraid.
When did you catch the acting bug, or have you always been like, I'm going to be an actor?
Yeah, first grade, we did a Christmas play at school, and the first graders had a classroom grandpa, which was like a senior from the neighborhood who would come and hang out. And so the play, I don't even remember what it was, but it wasn't a play. It was like a little skit. Uh-huh. And it was me and an 8th grade girl who I had the first grade hots for, and our classroom grandpa. Mm-hmm. And so I played the little boy, and I got to get out of class and go and rehearse, one day. And just getting out of class was cool enough. But then all I had to do in the little skit was sit on stage and read my Batman comic, which I would have done at home anyways. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I could do this. This works out well. I could do this for the rest of my life. And that was it. I can remember it clear as day.
Huh. So stage stuff. Did you do plays, performance, like stage plays first?
Yeah, I thought that was going to be my life.
Oh, okay.
I went to college for theater in Chicago. Yeah. And then Columbia.
Okay.
And then got out of that.
Go fighting Gamecocks. I don't know.
Yeah. What is No. Go. They're a school of people that go, sports. Like when the Super Bowl's on, they go like, oh, is the sports ball on? And you're like, shut up. It's the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl the entire world watches. And they're like, I have to go to the coffee shop.
Oh, that's good.
My first day there, I played football in high school. And then thought I was going to play football in college. Talked to one of the coaches at the college, asked him about the theater program. And you could see his eyes do the slot machine thing where he was like, well, what is theater? And I'm like, oh, I can't do this. So I went to Columbia. But on the first day there, I wore my letter jacket because I'm 18. I thought that was a thing that you did. And the look on you want to talk about horror. The look on all the theater kids' faces as I walked in with my letter jacket, and they're like, we just came here to get away from this. Are you just here to bully us? And I'm like, no, I'm one of you.
Oh, that's funny. You're like the guy from Glee.
Yeah.
That's good. So then you're from Chicago, go to college there.
I did theater.
Back out here?
No, I did theater in Chicago. I thought my life was just going to be like regional theater jobs. I had 2 theater companies. We, put on shows, and then I'd get the occasional job. I had a job at Chicago Shakespeare that paid you $400 a week, which, at 22 was like, was hitting the lottery. And then I ran a bar, and I did theater. And then I booked Prison Break. Mm-hmm. And did 18 episodes of Prison Break as I could have been a toaster for all that mattered. I came in, I said a line or two, and then, they moved the story along. But that was amazing. I mean, I remember I made $47,000 doing that and thought, well, this is the greatest. Yeah. This is this. I didn't do anything for this money, and this is what they'll pay you to do TV. And then I auditioned for a play that I really wanted called Bus Stop. And it was between me and another guy. And his name is Cliff. He's out here now. And Cliff got the role. And I thought, well, I don't want to do this for the next 30 years. It's just go back and forth with Cliff. So maybe I'll go to LA.
So did they, was Prison Break shot in Chicago? Is that what
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so was there people looking for talent just on the ground, and that's how you got it? Did they see a show of yours?
No, they held auditions for the local role, for the bit parts there.
Okay.
Which is a thing they do, they do if you're shooting in Atlanta, they'll populate some of the parts with local hires.
Yeah. Well, it adds a little production value, right? You're even hearing your story. It's like, okay, yeah, what you just said. It's like I'm running a bar. I got a sort of these different groups I'm going in. Like that's very Chicagoan sort of a thing. It feels like to me as an outsider.
Yeah,
like thinking
it is the way it's Chicago's a very working class city, and so like even the artists are working class.
That's good. So then they cast you as kind of working class, like beat cop or whatever. It's interesting. So a lot of your roles, not all of them. You've played a bunch of different kind of characters, but law enforcement is one. Right now, you're sporting a handsome mustache that is very correction officery. So your correction officer is Mac Andrus in Prison Break.
Yeah,
was your title, and then. So I was just looking at your IMDb page. You got a lot of roles that it's either officer so-and-so or sergeant or captain or detective so-and-so. And actually once, am I right? You even played a mall cop once? Does this ring a bell?
Yeah, I actually forgot about that job. So I saw something about it the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot about that show. I did play a mall cop. We shot in a mall.
So do they come in and they're like, cop, or do they look at your profile and go like, cop, so we can do it? Or do you feel like, I really like playing law enforcement?
Maybe a combination of all of them. I don't, I like playing whatever, but I, at 6'2", 220, sounding like I ate a bag of rocks, it's hard to play professor. Even though I always laugh about it because it's like there are professors and doctors and priests and lawyers that look like me. Yeah. Like I grew up around them. But in the world of TV and movies and they don't stretch the idea that far.
Yeah. Well, I think for the viewer, you're like, especially in film, maybe in TV series you have more space to develop it, but like you have to so quickly say, here's who this person is. It's like, go kill a dog, right? I rewatched Halloween the other night, and it's like, okay, yeah, he's bad. He murders the dog. We know, it's clear, right? So same thing.
It's a visual medium, so it's easier if you can just attach whatever story you're telling to a rough mug of a face.
So how do you think about that? So if you're you even have a uniform, so the uniforms look similar from one role to the next, but then you are obviously always you. So how do you think about bringing something unique to each role when the industry or the script or whatever is kind of pushing you to be generic cop X? Like, how do you think about that?
I don't.
Oh.
It's for a long time I thought I was just lazy, and I just was like, no, this is just what it is. But I have a lot of thoughts about law enforcement and the world of that, right? And so the thing is that it is meant to be a block. It's not meant to be an individualized thing. When you call the police show up all in the same car and they get out, and you could be dealing with 10 cops, but when they leave, they all sort of are the police. Like you don't think about it that way. So there is a thing like, because a lot of the characters I play are bad.
Yeah.
Bad people.
Yeah.
And a question people have is like, well, how do you play a bad character? Or an old acting trope, which I think is bullshit, is, don't judge your character. Like, you don't know you're a bad person. It's like, yeah, I do. I exist in Earth. Like, it's okay to be a bad person. Some people are bad people. And when we get to Lovecraft, I have a lot of thoughts about it, but about how I approach that. But it's like, it's okay to just be cop.
It's a good segue to Lovecraft then. I had a couple of questions. Maybe I'll ask you whether or not you watch your own work. Do you ever go back and watch, or do you not?
Oh yeah, no,
you do. Okay, good. Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
I'm not so precious about it that I.
Yeah, I know. I hear some. I would, and like if I public speak or whatever, if there's recording, I go back and like observe and like, what did I do there? I want to make But then I've heard others. It's like I never watch my.
Yeah, I think that's just so. I don't know.
Yeah,
there's a lot of preciousness about acting that I think is bullshit. So,
it's again very Chicagoan of you. So let's talk about the sort of horror. So Lovecraft is different than some of these other sort of procedurals and stuff you're doing in a lot of ways. Did you go in like a fan of horror, or was this like, okay, it's a job, I'm going to do it, but you're not necessarily a fan outside of that?
I probably would have watched it had I not been on it, but it wouldn't have been something that I would have thought like, this is a must watch for me. Horror to me, I'm a fan, but I'm a wimp. And so there was a long period of time where I wouldn't watch horror because I'm like, well, I'm scared at night.
Me too.
But my daughter, 11-year-old daughter now, that's all she wants to watch. All she wants is horror. She wants that adrenaline rush. And so now I am watching a lot of horror stuff.
What do you watch with her?
Anything and everything she can.
Also, are we allowed to play this if your wife is listening?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Flynn has taken her own path in what she watches. Most of it age wildly inappropriate.
Yeah.
But they see me get ripped apart by monsters on shows, and so they understand that it's all. But we just watched the Haunting of Hill House, which was awesome. But back to Lovecraft, like it was a job, right? I saw it, and racist Chicago cop in the 50s. It's just my wheelhouse, and I knew it was a prestige job, so I really wanted it. And then I read the book, and it's horror, but it's supernatural, and there's a purpose. I guess it's this thing, like there's a purpose to the horror that. I don't like these horror things like slasher films, like
Saw 7.
Yeah, like Saw's dumb to me. I'm like, it's just gore porn.
Yeah.
Or Flynn, everybody can message me and tell me how bad this is. Flynn watched Terrifier, which is that clown movie, and we had a long conversation before. I asked her not to watch it, and then she watched it. Luckily, she came and told me she watched it, and we talked about it, and I was like, what'd you think? And she goes, it was good. There was not really a story, and they just killed a bunch of people. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, you realize those guys, like the director, like he's got something weird with women. They kill men in the movie, but they torture women. And she was like, yeah, I didn't think about it. And that to me, I'm like, well, this serves no purpose. You just put creepy makeup on a clown, and now you're killing people. Whereas The Haunting of Hill House, there was a through line, and once you got to the end and they're talking about what life and death and being together and love is, you're like, thank you for this. And Lovecraft is that too. It's I don't know if anyone wants to sit down and watch another seminar on race right now. But like a TED talk about how shit was in the 50s. Hopefully, anybody that wants to know about it by this point, over the past few years, should know about it. They should know about redlining. They should know about, institutional racism. The people that don't want to know about it, you're not going to get them by saying, hey, we got to tell you about this thing. They put a bus here, they put a bridge here, and they built it so the buses can't get from that neighborhood to the beach, so that's what racism looked like. And they said, bullshit, that bridge has always been there. It's like, wow. But if you paint it in such a way to say, like, here's all the exact same lessons, but we're going to put them in a monster because we're going to trick you with horror. And it's horrific, and it's true horror, but we've sort of tricked you into thinking this way because we made it magic or supernatural or monsters coming out of the sewer. It's the same story. They just tricked you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think Misha Green talks a little bit about that, of like, just, I'm not going to take off like, oh, here's the horrors of slavery, or here's the horror of racism, or the Jim Crow, but you recast it in this way, and it's compelling. So I remember I didn't originally know you were in this until I was watching it, and then it's like episode 3, and I'm like, wait, what? That's Mac. So I text you, and I'm like, oh, hey, I saw you on that, and I found the text thread, and here's your response. You go, it was great. As you watch the show, just remember that I'm decent in real life. So, and as it progresses, I'm like, oh, okay, that's what you said. So, so you mentioned like it puts this real sort of racism, this real horror in real life, in monsters, like actual monsters. But what I find interesting is, especially with your character, so you've got the actual creatures in Lovecraft, so it's that sort of monsters, and they actually. In the sundown towns, the sun goes down, and then out come these monsters going to, eat you alive.
But how is that different from reality?
Yes,
Maybe you were
well, and that's
there,
where the thing. So, but then over time, like those are there, but then it turns out perhaps not you, Mac, but your character, the racist cop, turns out to be the monster. So it's the representation of these institutions and these other things that are actually the most monstrous. So I'm wondering, I'm assuming, this is a leading question, so then what's it like, because before you're talking about what it's like to play a cop in a procedural, now what is it like to play in this sort of sci-fi, mystery, whatever, the monster of the horror film?
The joke I made when we were making it, and when it came out, I was like, the only difference between Bad Cop on ABC and Bad Cop on HBO is one word said multiple times to a person that you shouldn't say it to. That's the N word, which I had to say multiple times. And the way I thought about it was, it was very much people's experience. And if I played it cartoonishly, it would have degraded people's experience of life, right? Like even to today. Black people's experience with the police, not great. Consistently not great. So if I wouldn't have played it right down the line, not magical, not goofy, not supernatural, exactly what it is, then it would have devalued those real experiences people have had.
Did you see Django Unchained? Do you
Yes.
remember that? So I read a thing. Leonardo DiCaprio it's like Jamie Foxx and Samuel L. Jackson, and he's like some side conversation, and DiCaprio's like struggling with how many times he has to use the N word.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And they're based, and Samuel L. Jackson comes up, so he's like, so you got to forget about. And I'm sure he dropped 10 F-bombs in the process, but something like, forget about it. This is just another Tuesday, and it's something like that of him going, okay, to my black colleagues who have real lives in the real world, they're kind of like, dude, this welcome to our world, and that's what we need you to play because that's the world.
And that's very much the thing. Like, I'm sure in that conversation, Samuel Jackson was saying, welcome to Tuesday, we're at work. But also, like, this is our Tuesday. Like, any day, somebody could just start screaming this at us. Like, you, Leo, you get to leave. Like, it doesn't matter. Last night, a friend of mine, I was out with a writer buddy of mine, and he was talking about, he got a text from somebody else that said, another writer, that said, hey, I'm trying to figure out a punchline for this joke. And the joke is, what's the difference between Satan and a black cop? Exactly. And it's my buddy who's a writer who is a former pastor. He's very, very smart. And he was like, it took me all night to come up with a joke. And, a meant to be joke. And the joke I came up with after a couple minutes, I was like, even off duty, Satan is still Satan. And that to me is the thing. Like, you have, like, what's more horrific than a racist cop with magical powers? But in the world we live in, the racist cop doesn't have magical powers. He's still horrific.
Although maybe, I mean, I agree, there's not actual magical powers, but there is that sense of you tap into a bigger, so like my notion of evil is less supernatural than it is something about like organizations. So have you ever worked at like a business or whatever that like you get all these people together, and all of a sudden there becomes this kind of higher level thing that is the institution that affects us all. Like whatever it is, like maybe it's our mission or our vision or whatever.
Yeah.
But it like starts this sort of downward pressure that I would say is like extra human, or like, above humans, even if it's not like a spirit or something. And in that sense, a cop or anybody that can leverage and pull the sort of levers of the institution can like tap into a power that other people can't.
For sure.
The law, right? So it even there blurs the lines of like there is a little bit of magic, if you want to call it that.
In like groupthink, institutions terrify me.
Yeah.
I always think back to the Joe Paterno stuff. And the thing that kept that going and hidden was the institution. The institution of Paterno, of football, of Penn State. And it was, you couldn't even come near it because the institution, like you said, it was like a force field. There was power to it.
And it's very, even though it's not explicitly religious, it is religious, right? Like it's like it takes on this sacred aura that you can't, and that's why people wouldn't call him out. They wouldn't say anything. It's like,
for sure.
It's Joe Paterno,
But also, you say it's not religious, but like, it's not our definition of sort of mystery, or it's not our definition of what we view as religious, some omnipotent, God. But it's like, why isn't it? It's a controlling situation. Like it is religious.
And that's actually where I was trying to get at. Like it's not a traditional religion, but it is definitely religious. Yeah. Okay, so I have a question about that in a second, but I don't want to lose the thread of. So I think one of the most terrifying scenes. It's maybe episode 5 or 6, can't remember, but you're basically casting a spell over the young Diana Freeman, played by Jada Harris.
Yeah.
And it's intense. Like I'm just imagining, especially if you're a young black girl, like interacting with the cops, it's you and another white cop, like pinning her in the alleyway, and then you like start mumbling all this like religious, spiritual, whatever incantation, and you like spit on her, I'm guessing. So again, this is where like real life blurs into the space of acting. And I'm guessing a Misha Green is kind of setting you all up to go like, okay, how do we film this? How do we take care of this young, I'm guessing she's 12 or 13-year-old black girl.
Yeah. She was 13.
13.
Yeah.
You all know that you're playing roles, but at the same time, like you're saying, like you're using words and movements that could actually trigger all sorts of stuff for everybody there. What kind of on-set stuff did you guys do to basically take care of each other? To say we can play the role, but some things are
I went out that night and got real drunk.
After the film? After filming? Yeah.
That was one of the hardest days I've ever had on set.
Man.
Lovecraft was an interesting job, and this is a very big answer to the small thing, and I'll get back to that. But it was an interesting job because like we've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
I want to be everybody's friend. I'm loud. I'm out here. I want to be buddies with everybody. Yeah. And I got to that set, and especially on set, like one thing I like to think is like I might not be the best actor in the room, but I want to be the best guy on set. I want to be the guy you want around for everybody's ease, right? Lovecraft was not that. And it was the first time I had ever experienced it. And in the world of the show, there were a lot of things happening all at once on Lovecraft. But in the world of the show, it's a predominantly black main cast. I'd never worked on a show like that. It was a black showrunner. And a lot of the directors that came in were black and black women. And then there's me, the white guy, and the piece of shit racist that the day I have to say these things, like everyone's looking at me. Most sets I'm on, it is my people I identify with, and the black actors are coming into those situations, and it was reversed, and it was weird, and it was hard, and I did not have an opportunity to hit it off with the cast because in their process, they didn't want to know Mac. Mac was coming in and doing horrible things to them. And so they didn't want to know what I was doing outside. We got there eventually, but like, I didn't speak to Jonathan Majors. We didn't work that much together, but I didn't speak to him until the end, till my last night. Michael K. Williams, I introduced myself to him, and he goes, "Who are you playing?" I said, "Lancaster." And he goes, "Oh man, I don't want to talk to you now," as a joke. And then we talked, and then he walked off. It was wild. And so on that day of doing the spell, it was real hard because I have a daughter the same age, and I was trying to talk to her about my daughter, and she was cool, and her mom was there, but when we get at it, we had to get at it. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it's like, if I half-ass it because she's a kid, or I feel bad, or this is uncomfortable to me, it's bullshit. It's degrading what experience these people have had. It was a rough day.
It makes me think you're right that for the most part, we're a couple of white guys, and most of our life we can operate as the primary, the dominant sort of identity is us. And it's actually hard to get in a space where you are the one on the margin, right? And going like, okay, I get a little taste of what daily life is for those who are actually marginalized every day.
Yeah.
And that's got to be not only difficult, but kind of eye-opening or enlightening in some way.
It was very eye-opening because we were shooting in Atlanta, and Atlanta Metro is a black city. It's a historically black city. And
what year were you actually shooting? Do you remember?
2018.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right.
I don't even know what year it is now.
Okay. I know. COVID brain.
Let's say pre-COVID. So it could be from 1900 to pre-COVID. I think it was the second day, I started walking around. I don't feel uncomfortable anywhere. I'm fine. And again, that goes back to, I'm a large white man. I can go anywhere. And there's nothing stopping me. And I walked home from set. I like to walk. And so, they're like, "Hey, we'll give you a ride." I said, no, I'm gonna walk back home, back to the hotel. And it was like a 2.5, 3 mile walk. And I'm walking, and I realized, I'm like, shit. About 2 blocks ago, I walked into a stretch that's not a great neighborhood. And I'm too far in to go back without it being apparent, and I'm too far, I can make it.
Yeah.
And it's right where all the highways go. And so, again, going back to sort of contextual knowledge, I'm like, oh, I see what they did here. They cut this little 6-block stretch off, and now nobody cares for it, and it's sort of a rougher neighborhood. And I saw about a block up on the other side of the street, there were like 6 or 9 black kids, black teenagers, older teenagers. And I immediately went on edge. And they weren't doing anything. All they were doing was hanging out in their neighborhood. Same shit I do, right? They were standing outside. And I immediately went on edge and thought, like, I can't go back because they'll see it. I gotta go, and maybe I can make a break for it. But I started to work through this thing, and I'm like, what am I doing? And it's exactly what the set I had just come off of. It was a very interesting realization that I was like, what I just felt all day on set, I am now doing to these kids hanging out. It was very interesting, and it wouldn't have happened in a non-predominantly black city. It was a very cool experience.
You had mentioned before, because the other, I think, craziness of that scene or the whole show is, it's racist Chicago cop, but it's also he's magic.
Yeah.
And then the magic in the show, whether it's sort of like a metaphor or whatever, for these different powers, and spoiler alert, at the end, it's basically all these white guys or white women basically trying to control magic at the expense of others, and then who gets to control it, so forth and so. But it's really interesting because there's all this stuff with it's blurs between sci-fi and murder mystery and whatnot, but this undertone of magic and religion, specifically Christianity, is always there. And so it kind of gets blurred where it's like, wait, is this mostly Christianity or kind of a mix? Kind of doesn't matter at the end of the day. But what was it? So like you have all the challenges playing a bad racist cop. What then becomes more challenging when you add to that it's a bad racist cop who's doing this like religious stuff?
I found it more interesting because there's another layer of it, but if I read the book too. And so they talk about it in the show. In the book, they explain it a little more, but all it is that it's magic. It's Christianity, but not Christianity. It's all they're trying to do is figure out the language of Adam, which if you say it simply, it's like Adam talked to God. And so that like with ease, right? And was able to request all of the things. So that's all they're doing. It's not Harry Potter magic. Yeah. All they're doing is manifesting like a shred of creation. And when you think about it that way, it's like, yeah, that's just power. And they're all just questing after this power, which is all, in my mind, religion is. And that's, if you're already a cop and already a sergeant and already have guys under you and you're already a head of an organization, a sort of shadow organization, like, that's all, it's all the same. It's all just power. And so the magic that happens in the show, for me at least, it's just a continuation of what I'm doing. I'm just trying to have power over everybody.
Yeah. So did you, when it came to either the show or, because you're right, as I'm thinking, your character is mostly doing magical incantations, less riffing on like biblical script, because other times but
they're not magic. It's weird. Like the language we spoke.
That's the language of Adam?
Yeah. It's just the language of Adam. So sure, we're calling it magic, but even if you go, like, if you think a talking snake was in the Garden of Eden and was handing out apples, if you believe that, that's not magic. You believe in talking snakes, right? I don't believe that. And so somebody shows me a talking snake, I think they're magic. So we, in the world of the show, are not doing magic. We're just speaking, whatever. We're speaking Aramaic. We're speaking a dead language that we found.
Okay.
So my manifestation of the two, I'm trying to think of the correct word to say here, but it's not a word I'm going to say. The two girls that I manifest, right, to the two demons. Sure, it's magic in 2023, what we're talking about. But in the world of the show, it's not magic. I have the language of creation.
So it's a technique or a tool to do something. Yeah, that's good.
Same as burning incense at a church. Or taking, like, okay, here, let me ask you a question and see if you find this, if this would be a good horror movie. I got a guy, and he's a good guy, right? He can do some weird shit. He can manifest some things. He can make stuff. So you're like, oh, this guy's magic. And so I nail him to a huge piece of wood with giant nails, and I let the birds peck him. And then I get some soldiers to slice his belly open. And so now we're in the horror slasher world. And then he becomes a zombie. And he comes back and he gets an army of other people to do things. And the only way to do the thing that he needs you to do is to eat his flesh. Like, that's horrific. That movie sounds awesome. that's all we're doing. Like that's I don't know. Now I'm going off on a tangent, but that's like that's it. Like
well, so I think that's where my question is going. So your kind of background with just religion generally, or even Christianity in this sense, is that hovering in the background as you're playing this character and inhabiting this role? Like, or did it inform it at all?
Yeah, it informed it a lot. Because this character, the character Lancaster, is a version of my grandpa, who I view as one of the great men of my life. To me, he was. Yeah. To the world, maybe not a great man. To his own kids, probably not a great man. But he was a racist. And he was a guy living in Chicago in the 1950s. And he had a modicum of power. But he went to church every week. He was very religious and very Catholic. And so it did, I thought a lot about that during this time. It's like Lancaster was doing horrible things to an end that he has justified, to believe that he can have direct access to God, the powers of God, which is a lot of what current modern religion is as well.
Yeah, there is a lot at stake as you think about people in religious institutions, whatever. That's so
Perhaps we should discuss my views. I'm an atheist. And
sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to inform all this too, like I'm an atheist. I grew up by choice, very religious Catholic. And so when I've thought a lot about all this stuff, and it fascinates me.
Yeah, you. I don't know if you read the whole thing, but read my book on atheism, or some chunk of it. Yeah.
I loved it.
But then you also were saying, so out here we've got, for the listener, or maybe there's two of you out there, a series. We're here in an office that contains. Not Ambrose, Alabaster. I call him Ambrose. No, it's not Ambrose. Stop, cut. Okay. We're right here, and we have Alabaster here who make these sort of coffee table, like really slick-looking coffee table versions of the Bible. And you're like, oh, great. This will convince my kids to read it. So is that, and then we start talking about like some of the horrific stories in the Bible, or what you just did, like here's the Jesus story. I'm with you. I mean, early Christians, were accused of being atheists, because they didn't worship all the gods. They're like, no, you got to worship all the gods. Yeah,
that's messy. How about one god?
And then of being cannibals or eating children. Like this was like the root. But it's like, well, because they were literally eating the flesh of their god, right? Like that's, so what do you, I mean, that's pretty crazy stuff. And the other stories, like there's stories where like, they go out and they collect other people's foreskins and like wear it on a pelt as like, it's like 70 men's foreskins, or even worse, probably most horrific. A concubine is like chopped up into her body parts and distributed, like mailed. Yeah,
you have to mail them to all the corners of the earth.
And it's like,
how about just putting, burying someone up to their neck and throwing rocks in their head?
Yeah.
And for the real celebrated stories of the Old Testament, the only thing missing is the rock.
Yeah.
It's like there's a giant flood that killed everybody, and the rock built a boat by hand and saved all the animals, and they couldn't get into was it Samaria? I don't know, but they couldn't get into a city, and they were at war with the city, and finally the King Rock, he took out his horns and he took the walls down by himself, and everybody died. It's like, it's terrifying.
So do you think, as you think through, like, I'll get my kids to read the Bible, which you've now kind of said, this is a belief in a world that I'm not buying into, but now I see the stories that were still part of like my childhood and everything else. Is this similar to watching House on Haunted Hill, where you're going, hey, I want you to encounter some stories that are out there, and then I'm going to kind of be a parent, meaning I'm going to walk with you through how this impacts you and what it means, and as you develop and grow?
Yeah, yes, very much so. So like atheism is a typical, as sort of poorly defined categories, one who doesn't believe in God. Mine is a little more nuanced in the sense that I don't give a shit. Right? Like, I don't care. People, you'll get a lot of conversations like, well, why don't you? I'm like, I don't care. I give God no thought whatsoever. If a God exists, great. If it doesn't, great. It's of no worldly concern to me. It's not going to change how I behave. Because otherwise, if it does, then you're not really doing it. You're just Pavlov's dog. You're going like, shit, I'm worried about that, so I'll be good now. My kids, and I talk and think about it a lot. So my kids, an 11 and 8-year-old, they were like, they fancy themselves atheists too, but they have no idea what that means because they haven't thought it out and come back or got to the other side. So they have a bit of the sort of Christopher Hitchens atheism of anger in them, which I find exhausting. That was me in my 20s. It's dumb. And so we talk a lot about it where I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like other people need this. My daughter, she gives no thought to death. She used to be scared of death. She could care less now. Couldn't care less. And she talks about it. I think when you die, it's just done. Or something else happens and I don't care. She's thought it out to the point of like, we've talked about it like, well, other people need what I would refer to as a fantasy to still their loved ones are somewhere else, right? For their own heart. So the idea of having the Bible in my house sounds awesome. And it's not about so they can get these cool stories that are in the Old Testament or Revelations, which is awesome. And
some more horror there for you.
It's it's the best. Like, don't look outside. I remember growing up between 12 and 2 on Good Friday, you weren't allowed to look out the window because it could be the end of times. And if you looked out the window, you'd that was a weird Catholic thing. If you look out the window, you could die from sight. Like whatever you see. I mean, they made Bird Box. Bird Box is Revelations. So just the ability to sort of draw, like that's our standard text, as Westerners, the Bible, right? And more so than the Torah or the Quran or anything else, it's the Bible. And so it's a disservice for my kids to not read it and not understand, like, everything you exist in right now is based on this book. So get a good hold of it and read it. Read it just for the words, but also like read it critically, read it analytically, and come to the other side. Like, if one of them wants to be some sort of snake handling Baptist preacher, that's on them. As long as they're not like a White Sox fan or as long as the Cubs and the Bears are in their hearts, I don't really care what they do. But that's my thing. It's like it's important to have it. And if I have just a Bible in my house, you can't. It's so inaccessible, and we were talking about that earlier. I mean, it looks like the forbidden text. So throw this up there.
No. Yeah, it's sort of like a demythologizing of it. It would be like guns or alcohol or whatever. Like if it becomes this taboo. The fact that you erect a wall in front of it makes it that more appealing, and who knows what they're going to do with it once they get there, because they will
for sure, and I hope they do.
Yeah.
But that's like American Christianity. American Christianity has broken down the walls of the access point, right? So like my experience was with Catholicism. So it's like I can't talk to God, but I can talk to the priest who can talk to God for me. I mean, it becomes a high school crush, a yes, no, maybe. Like I'm passing notes to God. And there's something fascinating about American Christianity where they're like, that. Just come to the strip mall. We built this giant church and everybody can talk to God. Pastor Rick, he's going to skateboard in and he's just there with his band. Like, it's all good. And then they sort of bastardized it. Not all of them, but then they were like, but give us a couple bucks because we're going to let God know to give it back to you.
Yeah.
And so it's fascinating to me. And that's the thing. It's like, if my kids want to be atheists or agnostic or whatever, they got to get there on their own. It can't be me that does it, because that's dumb.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about asking you this, but so now you're kind of not even kind of, an explicit like religious outsider. So you're like identify as an atheist in the most apathetic way possible.
Yeah.
Exactly. However that is. So it's pure apathy. Great. So now you're kind of looking back and at the inside. And I love what you just described. It's fun. Here's the strip mall. Pastor Rick comes, skates in. And then sort of feeding back onto horror. So what's interesting to me, as an insider looking at it, I go, now let's call it, U.S. Christianity is responsible for a lot of horrors in the world, or they become complicit in it, or they just staunchly refuse to denounce it or work against it. So what's the difference? And or sometimes they're actually inflicting pain and horror in certain people. So this gets to both, not just Roman Catholic, but Protestant, all the sex abuse scandals and all, just the cover-ups there, And again, as we discussed before, there's the Paterno instances as well. So it's not just religion, but it's particularly hypocritical, in religious contexts. So I wonder, as you look at it, and you're kind of raising kids who are watching horror movies, and you're in these shows, and you're thinking about the ways that these different institutions inflict terror on people. As an outsider, what are maybe some of the key ways that American Christianity is kind of inflicting terror on people? I don't know if you'd paint it exactly that, but
yeah,
what's it doing wrong? What's it doing bad in the world from your view?
I mean, it depends who you're talking about, and depends what you're talking about. But it's a lot of the sundown town in the pilot of Lovecraft. Those are real things, right? And it became a cloistered space and a closed off space inaccessible to all moving people, right? And you had to get from county line to county line, and you were dead. You weren't jailed, you were dead if you were inside it. And that's power, and that's access, and that's a right of movement and a us versus them. And so I think a lot of horror films and horror stories that we tell are us versus them, zombie stories, the living versus the dead. Saw and those type movies, Black Phone, people held against their will and put into a place of diminished power and held in a spot that they can't leave. And if they could only gain access to the truth, then they could get the out. And the truth maybe is behind the door, or the truth is a puzzle or something. Our stories as a Western society, I think, aren't, if you can break them down, they're not super interesting. They're just repeated, right? Like, Hercules and Thor and Jesus, they have a lot in common. It's just different how they did it.
And Harry Potter.
Exactly, yeah. And Luke Skywalker. So when you say like American Christianity, I view it as they are troping on the us. I don't think troping's a verb. They're troping on an us versus them. That is very, very dangerous. And they are causing a horror show by it. It is. They have made people like myself out to be zombies, coming for their brains and their flesh and their I have some people in my extended family and my wife's extended family that are devout born again Christians by title, not by action. And so what they have become is sort of bastardized American Christians. Real prosperity gospel, real conspiracy. They've gone down the rabbit hole of all the things, right? But they use the shield of God in that to say like, hey, I've really thought this out. And I wouldn't have discovered this stuff if it wasn't for God. And so I think that Mac maybe eats babies because he's part of Hollywood. And I'm like, well, this is, it's a story as old as the Bible. It's, as you were just saying, like we were thought to be cannibals, Christians were. And so that's the horror of the us versus them. And the them that American Christianity is painting, in my opinion, is soul-devouring monsters. It's not even that we're different or that look, I can deal with the burn in hell stuff. That's fine. I've thought that through, and I'm sort of resolved to my station in hell. That was the old thing. The old thing was like, well, if you don't get on board, later on you're gonna be toast, and it's gonna go poorly for you. Now, because of attainment of power, back to the Lovecraft thing, is some sort of singular source of power. They have said, like, it's not even hell. It's today. It's on Earth. They're coming for you. And they're coming for your brain and your soul and your babies. That's my...
No, that's great. I mean, part of the reason I ask is, I'm concerned about it.
Yeah.
And I'm, I think we've talked before, and I'm like, I'm an atheist of a certain kind, meaning that I think I'm actually a Christian, and I think that Christianity is a sort of atheistic thing, meaning that it's the call for the death of all gods, essentially.
Yeah.
And usually those gods have to do with power, and and then what you're describing, your extended family. That's a god that needs to die, right? That I'm like, I do not believe in that.
It's an earthly god.
Yeah. But the us versus them is really, if you want, there's a it won't tell you anything new, but it's compelling. Jesus and John Wayne is a look at American evangelicals of how they set up this us versus them in very intentional ways.
Yeah.
In our lifetime, really, mid late 70s.
I was going to say this is a new. This is the 70s. This is as new as taxes are bad and government doesn't work.
And even that, the conflation of the politics and like all of it. And I go, that is particularly evil, right? This and the us versus them. And so I love the framing of it because it isn't just you see the world differently or whatever, but you're an existential threat to me, and so you have no other choice but to destroy them. And all of a sudden you're like, wait, I thought Jesus told people to like love people that hate you.
They're done. They're done with Jesus. They're done with. They're like this is we need that Old Testament God.
Yeah.
They want a taste of Jesus.
Yeah.
Essentially they are Jesus in the streets. Old Testament God in the sheets. Like they want war. They want to be David.
Yeah.
They want to take out the horns and bring down the walls.
And I think people, at least now, and let's say if you're under 40, everyone's like, no thanks. And you see sort of like religious participation in the U.S. like rapidly declining, like everywhere, because I think everyone's going, this is clearly backwards, and it's clearly a power grab. And so part of my concern is to say, like, okay, how do we look at a horror film? This is back to like someone, like you said, if we just say, like, here's the history of racism, like, let's have a lecture. Same thing with, like, it would be really hard to compel someone who's, like, embedded in that Christian narrative to go, oh, here's all the awful things that you're doing as Christian. But now maybe if you think of it in terms of horror, like the metaphor of horror, maybe because it gets you on that visceral level of watching a cop leverage this language of Adam to inflict trauma on a young
spit
girl.
On like a young girl.
Yeah, like
You're
then you go, maybe it like interrupts you for a second.
And that's the hope is like, if you're an abject racist, you didn't get to episode 5 of Lovecraft Country.
Yeah.
But maybe you did for fun, hoping that the main cast would all die.
Yeah.
And so you can go like, okay, there's the uppity man, right? And like bad stuff should happen to him. And there's Letty and she's got too much spunk, so something bad should happen to her. And you could sort of see that in all the characters if you were a racist. And then you get to that part. This girl. She's a 12-year-old girl. You can go like, well, maybe you shouldn't spit on a kid. Like just for a second, right? And then you can remember like, oh yeah, I'm a piece of shit. I spit on kids. But like for a second, you go like, ooh, that was a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think it brings me to a less weighty question, but you do have like you know if you're watching as a racist or whoever, you might be going like, oh, you're the hero, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
so but then it becomes very clear.
Yeah.
maybe two episodes before the end, like you meet your demise. Mm-hmm. So I have two questions with this. One's more just like technical, and the other's maybe more acting wise. But so a giant monster, you're the monster, but then a giant creature comes and gobbles you to death. It's glorious and wonderful. So, like technically, how do you film that? Because it's CGI. So what does that look like when you're being consumed by one of
it was pretty weird. So they give you they have stunt guys. So like they're like, okay, you're gonna lay here, and then they box out where the monster is going to be because they have the specs of what it's gonna look like. And then they have stunt guys in green suits and dots on them that have sticks that are the length of the monster's arms.
Oh.
Because the monster's, 3 or 4 times the size of a person. So then they have a guy there, and he has the arms and the extended arms, and then I'm struggling in relation to the size of the stick, not the person.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
And then this guy's using the sticks to sort of tear at me.
Huh.
So he's coming down on a weird angle, and then you're fighting off something that's not there.
Yeah.
You're also fighting in an area where a person is not. Mm-hmm. But they've made it a size of a thing. Like, they tape out an area and say like the creature is this big, so you have this much room to theoretically be fighting him.
So is that the main thing going through your mind? Like, how do you make that convincing? That's what I'm trying to think of. Like, because it was.
They make that convincing.
Yeah. Oh,
okay. I just scream.
You just scream.
Like there's. So when you do voiceover stuff for like video games, which it's always you do like dialogue, and then the last 2 or 3 pages, depending on the video game, are like the deaths, and it's always like okay, you got shot. Okay, you got shot in the stomach. Okay, you get shot multiple times, but my favorite is always there's always 3 versions of getting lit on fire, and they want different versions, and it drives me nuts because I'm like, you're on fire, but sometimes you're only a little bit on fire and you're dying, but you're trying to put it out, and then other times you're fully engulfed. So it's like that. It's like, how do I make getting ripped apart by a monster guy? I don't know. I just scream like I'm on medium fire.
Oh, that is good. Last couple of things because we're running out of time. That you can talk about.
Yeah, that I can talk about.
There's one that you can't, and I
won't
ask you about
fewer
that.
and far. Everyone wants you to sign their NDA now, like they're important too. There's one I'm currently working on, can't talk about, but there's a movie coming out next month, February, called Ambush that I'm very excited about. Horror. It's a horror.
Oh, great.
It's set in Vietnam, and it is horror. So it's for the first half of the movie is your sort of by the numbers Vietnam, rah-rah movie, and it's early in the war. And the second half of the movie, we discover the tunnels and have to go down into the tunnels to retrieve classified information. It's very topical. And so the tunnels are it becomes a horror movie in the tunnels, but not supernatural.
Yeah.
Like exactly what tunnels in another country would be during war. So that's a movie called Ambush. I'm really excited about that. Also not a great guy in that. But I get my comeuppance.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You're getting typecast. So that's
Fine with me. It keeps the lights on.
I know.
Like I am available for all your bad guy needs.
Yeah. Well, it also reminds me, the Apocalypse Now ends with the horror. The horror. That's a horror film. Horror war film.
It's a horror war film. Yeah. I mean, the way Brando comes up out of the water, he is a monster.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
we make our own as a society, as a species. We make quite enough horror. We don't need magic and monsters.
I'm with you there. I'm with you there. Well, thank you. It's been great, and I have a lot to think about. I'm gonna have to rewrite the episode in light of some of the things you said.
Derailed the entire.
No,
thing.
in a very good way. So, 'cause